In this video, we'll walk through every execution scheduled in the United States for June 2025. Each case has its own story, complex, tragic, and often controversial. We'll break down the crimes, the sentencing, and what led these 6 prisoners to the brink of their final days. From last-minute legal battles to decades-old tragedies, these cases reveal the darkest corners of the American justice system. Let's start with the first case. Anthony F. Wainwright. Anthony F. Wainwright's path to Florida's death row is a case that has haunted investigators, attorneys, and the families involved for decades. Born in the early 1960s, Wainwright grew up in rural North Florida, far from the cities that would later be splashed across news headlines. But by the late 1990s, his name would become synonymous with a particularly brutal crime, a crime that would seal his fate. It began on a hot May afternoon in 1994. 43-year-old Donna Callahan, a young mother working the counter at a Jacksonville convenience store, was abducted at gunpoint. Witnesses later recalled the quiet fear in her eyes. But the suspect moved fast, vanishing with Donna before help could arrive. The trail led across county lines and state borders, but it was days before her remains were discovered. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered, her body hidden in a remote wooded area. For weeks, law enforcement scrambled for leads. Eventually, DNA evidence and witness accounts pointed squarely at Anthony Wainwright, whose prior criminal record only deepened suspicion. After his arrest, Wainwright initially denied all involvement, but mounting forensic evidence, along with testimonies from accomplices, left little doubt about his guilt. The trial that followed was one of the most closely watched in recent Florida history. Prosecutors painted Wainwright as remorseless, a predator who had targeted an innocent woman with chilling calculation. The jury listened to days of graphic testimony, including medical experts describing the violence Donna suffered in her final moments. When the verdict came, there was little surprise. Wainwright was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and sexual assault. The judge, citing the heinous, atrocious, and cruel nature of the crime, sentenced him to death. Over the next 2 decades, Wainwright's legal team filed appeal after appeal, arguing everything from improper jury selection to mental health issues. But the courts denied every motion, affirming the original sentence. As his execution date nears, Wainwright remains mostly silent. He has declined media interviews and, according to prison staff, spends most days alone in his cell. The victim's family, now grown older, has said they hope this final chapter brings them closure, though the pain of their loss has never faded. For the state of Florida, Wainwright's case is a grim reminder of the ultimate penalty reserved for the worst of the worst. On June 10, 2025, Anthony F. Wainwright is scheduled to die by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Gregory Hunt. Gregory Hunt's name is forever tied to one of Alabama's most shocking murders, a crime that left both investigators and the local community reeling. In the early morning hours of March 5, 1988, emergency dispatchers received a frantic call from the home of Jacqueline Harrell, a well-known figure in Montgomery. When police arrived, they found a grisly scene. Jacqueline had been shot multiple times, her body slumped in the hallway. Her 2 children, hiding in a closet, survived the ordeal but would never forget what they witnessed. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Hunt, a former boyfriend who had a history of domestic violence and unresolved anger toward Jacqueline. In the days leading up to her murder, Hunt had threatened her repeatedly, unable to accept the end of their relationship. On that fateful night, prosecutors argued, Hunt broke into her home, waited in the darkness, and ambushed her as she returned from work. Evidence at trial was overwhelming. Ballistics matched the weapon found at Hunt's residence to the bullets recovered from Jacqueline's body. Neighbors testified about Hunt's violent temper, and friends described years of stalking and threats. The most compelling testimony came from Jacqueline's surviving children, who, though young, bravely recounted the terror of that night in court. Hunt's defense centered on claims of mental instability, pointing to childhood trauma and possible brain injury, but the jury remained unmoved. After only a few hours of deliberation, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of capital murder. The judge imposed the death sentence, calling Hunt a danger to society and a perpetrator of one of the most senseless acts of violence this state has ever seen. In the years since, Hunt has maintained his innocence, filing appeals on grounds of ineffective counsel and challenging forensic evidence. Each effort has been struck down. As his execution date approaches, advocates on both sides of the death penalty debate have watched closely, some arguing for clemency due to Hunt's alleged mental illness. But the Alabama Supreme Court has declined to intervene. For Jacqueline Harrell's family, the scheduled execution offers a measure of justice long delayed. On June 10, 2025, barring last-minute intervention, Gregory Hunt will face lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility, closing the chapter on a case that changed a community forever. John Hanson. Oklahoma's death row has long been home to some of the most notorious cases in U.S. criminal history. John Fitzgerald Hanson is no exception. In 1999, Hanson, then in his late 20s, was involved in a crime that would ultimately lead to the deaths of two innocent people. That summer, 77-year-old Mary Bash was abducted from a Tulsa shopping mall. She was forced into her own car at gunpoint by Hanson and an accomplice, Victor Miller. The pair drove her to a remote area, where Hanson opened fire. Mary miraculously survived the initial attack, but was left for dead. But the violence didn't end there. As Hanson and Miller attempted to leave the scene, they were confronted by Gerald Thurman, the property owner. In the chaos, Miller fired, fatally wounding Thurman, who died in hospital 2 weeks later. The evidence against Hanson was overwhelming. Witness statements, forensic evidence, and a prior history of violent offenses. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, one for the attempted killing of Mary Bash and another for Thurman's death during the commission of a felony. The trial was a spectacle, with prosecutors highlighting Hanson's prior convictions and describing him as a cold-blooded career criminal. The jury didn't take long to convict, and in 2001, Hanson was sentenced to death. For years, his case stalled as he remained in a federal prison in Louisiana on unrelated charges. Only in early 2025 was he returned to Oklahoma, where his execution was quickly scheduled. Hanson's legal team made a final push for clemency, citing autism and his vulnerability to influence by Miller, who received life without parole. The Pardon and Parole Board narrowly denied the request. As the date of execution draws near, Hanson's story stands as a cautionary tale of lives destroyed by violence, of a system that waited decades for justice, and of the grim finality of capital punishment. On June 12, 2025, John Fitzgerald Hanson is set to be executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Stephen Stanko. Stephen Stanko's journey from aspiring author to South Carolina's death row is as chilling as it is confounding. In 2005, Stanko was released from prison after serving time for a nonviolent offense. He found work at a public library and began dating Laura Ling, a respected librarian. For months, he seemed to be turning his life around. But beneath the surface, old demons simmered. On April 8, 2005, those demons erupted in unspeakable violence. That night, Stanko brutally murdered Laura Ling in her own home. He then assaulted and killed Henry Turner, an elderly friend who lived nearby. The crime scene was gruesome. Laura had been beaten and strangled, while Henry suffered blunt force trauma. Stanko fled across state lines, sparking a days-long manhunt that ended with his capture in Augusta, Georgia. Police recovered evidence linking him to the crime, including stolen credit cards and the murder weapon. The trial riveted the state. Stanko, articulate and emotionless, claimed insanity. He described hallucinations and delusions, arguing he was not responsible for his actions. Prosecutors countered with psychiatric reports declaring him sane and calculating. The jury agreed. Stanko was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to death, the judge calling him a manipulator, a predator, and a danger to society. Stanko's appeals have focused on his mental health, with supporters claiming the state failed to properly treat his psychiatric disorders. but all legal avenues have failed. For the families of Laura Ling and Henry Turner, the scheduled execution is a long-awaited, if somber, measure of closure. On June 13, 2025, Stephen Stanko will be executed by lethal injection at the Broad River Correctional Institution. Thomas Lee Gudinas. Thomas Lee Gudinas' case has been described as one of the most disturbing in Florida's history. In April 1994, Gudinas and an accomplice abducted Denise Collins from a downtown Orlando parking garage. Denise, a young woman with a bright future, was assaulted, beaten, and ultimately murdered. Her body was found hours later in a wooded area outside the city. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned detectives. Gudinas was quickly arrested. Evidence included surveillance footage, DNA, and confessions. At trial, prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative. Gudinas and his partner had targeted Denise at random, planning only to rob her but escalating to murder when she resisted. The defense argued Gudinas suffered from mental illness, but the jury was not swayed. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, and the judge imposed a sentence of death. The case has dragged on through multiple appeals, each rejected by higher courts. Victims' rights advocates have pointed to Gudinas' crime as justification for the continued use of the death penalty in Florida. His legal team, meanwhile, has argued for clemency, citing childhood trauma and possible intellectual disability. With the execution date set for June 24, 2025, Gudinas' story comes to an end at Florida State Prison, a stark reminder of the system's most severe punishment. Richard Gerald Jordan. Richard Gerald Jordan's name is one of the longest standing on any U.S. death row. His crime dates back to 1976 when he kidnapped Edwina Martyr, a mother and bank secretary from Gulfport, Mississippi. Jordan demanded a ransom from her husband, but by the time the money was delivered, Edwina was already dead, shot execution style and buried in a shallow grave. The murder shocked the small community and made national headlines. Jordan was arrested within days after making several incriminating phone calls traced by authorities. He quickly confessed to the kidnapping and murder. At trial, prosecutors argued Jordan had meticulously planned the crime, targeting Edwina as a means to fast cash. The jury, horrified by the premeditation and lack of remorse, sentenced him to death. Over the next 5 decades, Jordan's case became a lightning rod in debates about the death penalty. His appeals raised constitutional questions, leading to multiple resentencing hearings and retrials, yet the outcome remained the same. The courts upheld his death sentence. Now, in his late 70s, Jordan has spent nearly 50 years on death row. As his execution approaches, Edwina Martyr's family has expressed relief, saying justice is long overdue. On June 25, 2025, Richard Gerald Jordan is scheduled for execution at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, closing one of the oldest active death row cases in the country. And that's the full list of prisoners scheduled for execution in June 2025. Their crimes, their sentences, and the stories behind each case. If you found this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime coverage. Sharing and subscribing helps us keep bringing you the latest updates and in-depth stories from the world of justice and criminal law. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.